Hi, I'm Kate Bailey. I'm a coach, an author, and a sober mama. And this is Love Sober, the podcast for the sober and sober curious.
You know who made it.
Hi, and welcome back to Love Sober, the podcast for the sober and sober curious. And today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the awesome Dufflyn Lammers. And Dufflyn is a relationship and recovery coach, and she's a writer, and she's based in Paris, and she coaches people remotely all over the world. And she's also a dear sober sister and a friend. So it's just a complete joy to speak to you this morning, Dufflyn. So hi.
Hi, good morning. It's a joy to be here.
Yeah, how are you doing this morning?
I'm pretty good. I had my morning exercise and my morning meditation and did my morning reading. So far, so good. I'm doing the things.
Oh, the foundations are in place. Unlike me, I got up at 6:30 and I was just like faffing about on the phone. And then I've got my daughter has a call with her, like a support worker this morning. So it's school routines a little bit all over the place. And I was just like, oh no. So yeah, we've had kind of quite different starts to the day.
Well, to be fair, you were up before me, so you get credit for that.
That's true. And also you've got an hour on me because you're Paris time and I'm I'll just blame it on the time. That's fine.
There you go.
So we're going to dive into the subject of Dufflyn's speciality, her specialism today, love addiction. You know, we were having a little chat about this and just unpicking the kind of, Love Sober being a podcast for the sober and sober curious. So we focus a lot on alcohol. But as we know, if we are going to something to cope, so we're using something in an addictive way, be it a substance, be it people, places, things, then we can develop addictive relationships with them and we can have cross addictions. And we can also experience a kind of spectrum of this kind of condition, just in the same way as we have, alcohol use disorder. You can be hazardous, harmful, you can be, end stages needing detox, so it's an all-encompassing kind of subject, really, with many nuances to pick out. So if you're listening in and thinking, well, that doesn't relate to me, listen on, because we're going to be diving into the nuances of it and the relationships, boundaries. And this, we're built to connect, right? We're built to connect with other people, and it can be really, really complex. So that's what we're going to dive into today. So Dufflyn, thank you so much again. Can you just explain a little bit, just explain to us what love addiction is?
Yeah, okay. So great introduction to the topic. And for me, love addiction has been described as a profound inability to bond with another human being. And when I think about that, I think about, okay, but when I was out there and I was, chasing cowboys and right, and chasing all sorts of unavailable men, I thought, well, the problem is that I can't bond with another person. No, I can do that just fine. The problem is no one wants me. But that right there, that thought is actually part of the cycle of love addiction. It's part of what I believe about myself. I believe that I'm not lovable in some way, right? And the reason I'm chasing unavailable people is because I'm unavailable and I don't know it, right? So that's one of the big characteristics of love addiction. And I see, honestly, love addiction, attachment disorder, attachment wounding, codependency. I feel like these are different words for the same thing.
Yeah, okay. So how do we know then? How do we know if we are suffering from love addiction?
Yeah, exactly. That's the question. So this is why I'm doing a webinar this weekend, a couple of them, called Is It Love or Is It Addiction? Because a lot of times it's really tough to know. And ultimately, there is a spectrum, right? The same way there is with a chemical addiction, with a process addiction, which is an addiction that has to do with behaviors, right? As opposed to the chemicals that are outside your body. So this is about the chemicals that are inside your body. And so we're looking at, okay, where are you on the spectrum of the normal functioning of relationships versus maladaptive behavior? So if, for example, like everybody falls in love, right? And we all aspire to fall in love, which might be one of the big differences between a chemical addiction and love addiction, is that, most people don't aspire to become an alcoholic or a junkie, right? Like most people are not like, I hope I grow up to be that. We're using it to cope with something, and yet most people do aspire to fall in love someday. So it's tough to know, right? So when we look at where are we at on the spectrum, it's also important to realize that this may be something that escapes you. It's really tough to know. I think it's a lot easier to see drug dependency than it is to see love addiction until it gets really, really rough. Yeah. And so that's one of the things I'm going to be talking about this weekend, is just some really specific hallmarks of addiction that you can look at, and they're going to help you figure out where you at on that spectrum. Because everybody, right, when we fall in love, we have this feeling of euphoria. That's the chemicals in your brain. That's the serotonin. That's the the dopamine, the oxytocin. Yeah, right. Like that's that feeling.
What a cocktail, right?
Exactly. So we all experience that. It's when we aren't willing to move to the next stage in relationship that we need to look at our behavior, and when we keep going back for more and more and more of that.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I was thinking about, I don't know what I was thinking about this the other day, but the TV and filmic and book, the fictional, and in pop music, all the tales of love seem to be that kind of, well, they seem to be that first stage, the first flushes or heartbreak. It's almost like we're fed this kind of diet of codependent modeling from wider society. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh, 100%. And the funny thing is, I mean, obviously I'm American, although I live in Paris. I was in Los Angeles in the entertainment industry for 15 years. And a lot of the people who are creating this material are suffering from this very thing. You know what I'm saying? So when I listen to a pop song, I have to consider the source. And while it's easy to get wrapped up in that, and it's catchy, right? And it's intriguing, and there's drama. Like, yes, there has to be drama. It's a story. It has to be high emotion if it's a pop song, especially if it's some of these, the ballads or the anthems, right, that we love so much, that are the great big hits. So it makes sense that someone is choosing those dramatic moments of life, but that's not what everyday life is like. That's not what a long-term relationship is like.
Yeah, it's like we want to see it on the TV. I was talking to Mandy about this yesterday because we're teaching the course on addictive behaviors, and we were looking at that kind of fight flight response and all of that, and put this slide up, and it was basically, I was like, yeah, it's like every scene, we want to watch it on TV, we don't want to live it, right? And there's a real difference.
Yeah. Amen. Amen to that. I mean, and I think that's the thing, is that someone who struggles to love and be loved, which is, this is how I prefer to describe this, right? Is rather than saying someone is a love addict or a codependent, I prefer to say, I'm a person who struggles to love and be loved. And someone who struggles to love and be loved is possibly going to begin to believe that actually, yes, that's how love is supposed to be. And if it's not like that, they may walk away from something that's perfectly good and perfectly healthy because they have the misinformed perception that, that something's missing and that love is supposed to be these high highs and low lows.
Yeah. Okay. So it's rewriting the narrative around the sort of drama of the highs and the lows, that kind of like, the falling in love. And so there's that side of it. And what other characteristics would we be looking for to, for positive modeling almost around this?
Absolutely. Because ultimately, what we're looking for, we do want to connect. As you said, we're all wired for connection, and that's what we want, right? Even people who are, avoidant, they somewhere inside they want to connect, and yet they're just not able to because of the fear of intimacy. And on the other side is the person who has the fear of abandonment. So usually it's one or the other is primary. So we can look for that, am I a person who's constantly having a fear of intimacy, and constantly sort of backing away? Or am I a person who has a fear of abandonment, who's constantly clinging, right? And I can't get close enough. I don't really believe that people are going to love me the way I need to be loved. Whereas the avoidant person believes no one's ever going to be able to love me and care for me the way I care for myself. So don't bother, right? So we can kind of see those two sides of the coin, and they can both be present in the same person. There's no reason that a person can't be both suffer from love addiction and also love avoidance at the same time, depending on what relationship they're in.
So there's something like, there's the kind of knowing your attachment style, the avoidant or the whatever it is, the anxious, isn't it? So the anxious or the avoidant attachment style. So it sounds like there's some work around at least knowing that, right? If we have some awareness of that, then we start to be able to think, well, actually, what can I do with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the person who is constantly pushing everyone away needs to step forward, and the person who's constantly clinging needs to step back. Right. And what often happens is that those two people end up in a relationship together.
Yeah.
Right. Because
pushing each other's buttons, making each other really miserable.
Exactly. And because it's interesting the way that operates, the person who's avoidant or dismissive, the way that they connect is they seduce. And the moment they think they've got you hooked, they begin to back away. So in those initial stages of relationship, which, like I say, even for normal people, there's that euphoria, there's that I feel like I've known you all my life, all of those feelings that come for everybody, except that there's this other dynamic going on underneath it that we don't realize until we're, a few weeks or a few months in, usually. Right. And by then, we're hooked, so one of the things I advocate for people who struggle to love and be loved is to go really, really slow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So that you're seeing the underlying patterns, and that you're seeing someone for who they really are, rather than seeing their representative, or rather than seeing, through those hormone goggles.
The hormone goggles, I love those. I've now got an image of the hormone goggles with they've got stars all over them and hearts. They're like bursting heart emojis. That's such a brilliant image, because it's true, isn't it? And there's that, I guess, what I'm hearing immediately, I'm hearing a gender piece there, because of women's hormones and attachment, right? So in a way, would you agree with that? Saying, I read somewhere that, if we have sex with someone, we bond. Is that true? And that, but men don't in the same way. So this is sort of, even more pertinent for women by the sounds of it. But I'll throw that out there as a question.
Absolutely. Oxytocin, which we talked about before, is the bonding hormone. And so when we share our body with another person, that hormone is released, and it causes us to feel those feelings of closeness, right, and bonding, which is necessary for the procreation, right, and the continuation of the species. So that's a biological function. We don't have any control over whether that happens or doesn't happen. And if you share your body to the extent that you have a climax, an orgasm, then that is multiplied, and especially for women. So what happens as a result is what I call dick fog, right? Which is similar to the goggles, right? So you've got this dick fog and you're like, I just think all I can see is my Prince Charming, right? Because that's what it does. It makes everybody into Prince Charming. So instead of kissing frogs and turning them into princes, like, this is what
The
we're
other way
doing, right?
around.
But this is the metaphor, right?
Yeah.
This is the metaphor, and I think, a very apt one.
That's I love that. I love that kind of, that's immediately piqued my myth interest. But I love, the dick fog and the goggles. And so going slow is essential. Knowing your kind of attachment style will give you an idea of how to almost, I guess, titrate or to play with your style, experiment with your style, right? And Dufflyn's nodding at me. You can't hear that. We're nodding at each other. But what else? And what else what else have we got to work with?
I feel like one thing that's really important is knowing what healthy intimacy looks like, and knowing what secure attachment looks like. And if that hasn't been modeled for us, sometimes we just don't know what that looks like, because that's not going to make a great blockbuster movie necessarily, right? Sadly. And nor, are there great novels, written about that. So, and if it hasn't been modeled for us in our family of origin, then we need to learn, okay, so what is healthy intimacy, and we may have the mistaken idea that healthy intimacy is like, everything's going to be perfect all the time. We'll always be honest, and we'll always behave, in the way that the other person would like for us to behave. And that is just not true. We have to realize that real intimacy is messy. Real intimacy means that, yes, sometimes we make mistakes, but we repair quickly. Right? If we did mess up and we told a lie, we go back and we say, you know what, I'm sorry, I wasn't honest about this. And here's the real truth. And here's, what's going on with me. And, and you make amends, you repair. Right? Whereas the toxic intimacy that we often do see, in one example I like to use is Sex in the City.
Yeah.
So, right, Carrie and Big. Here was an obviously toxic romance, and yet we watched it for 7 or 8 seasons. And because there was always that push and pull, that come here, go away, right? Sometimes at the same time, it's someone saying come here and go away at the same time. And the problem isn't necessarily that Carrie was toxic or that Big was toxic. The problem was that she kept taking him back, right? Instead of moving on. And so they got into this cycle, right, where there was constant betrayal, constant dishonesty, constant ruptures in the attachment relationship. And so they're living in the state of fight or flight all the time, right, which is just not healthy. So we need to know what healthy intimacy looks like. And then we need to know what does a secure person, how does a secure person behave? And a secure person, when you're first dating, is going to like spot smoking guns really quickly and walk away if they're like, oh, nope, not up for that. A secure person is going to have the outlook that there are lots of possible partners that could make them happy. A secure person is coming from the position that things usually work out for me, right? I'm okay, you're okay, things are okay. Right? They're not like ecstatically happy all the time, but they have a certain stability, which many of us who struggle to love and be loved, and who struggle with any kind of addiction, will find that boring. We're like, oh, but he's so nice, it's boring. And so this is why, if we go slow, we also have the opportunity to fall in love with the actual person instead of falling in love with love. Which, don't get me wrong, I am in love with love, just like everybody else. I am. And at the same time, I know that if I want to have the kind of deep intimacy and connection and secure attachment that I truly crave, that I have to slow down and give it time and actually fall in love with an actual person.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. Very clearly explained. And I'm wondering as well, what has this got to do with alcohol use disorder?
So love that you asked that question because I was thinking the same thing. So here's the deal. When we have any sort of an addiction, we're a lot more likely to be cross addicted. And you know that as well as I do, right? And when we talk about cross addiction, we also talk about, okay, which one is primary?
Mm.
And what that means is which one came first, right? So if I have been anorexic from the age of 10 and then I started drinking when I was 25, well, then the anorexia is primary, right? And we also know now that trauma is one of the primary causes of addiction, that many people see addiction itself as a symptom of trauma.
Yeah.
And right. And attachment disorder, attachment wounding, attachment trauma, which is also developmental trauma, like those are all different names for the same set of conditions. So that happens in when you're very, very young, right? Your attachment system is complete by the time you're 2 years old. So it's very difficult for that to not be primary.
Mm.
Right? So if we're looking back on, and there's also relational trauma, so it could have happened later, and that
Yeah.
may be what's causing, the issues. So each person has to look at, as we talked about, where they're at on the spectrum and also where this began for them, their own timeline.
Yeah.
Right. But it's really very common for someone who struggles with any type of an addiction to have either complex PTSD or developmental trauma or some sort of relational trauma. And that's what's playing out when we have this struggle to love and be loved.
Yeah, and just basically kind of describing my 20s. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. I'm just laughing. But what I want, it's really interesting because obviously I am doing constantly my work and, sort of trained as a coach as well. And so putting this together over the last few years myself, I found it very interesting. And like you said, the trauma piece is just such need to know intel about that dysregulated system, which will then try to soothe and attach to something, right? So even if you think back and you think, oh, I haven't got trauma, but if the chronic stress as well, we're trying to regulate ourselves with other people or with substances. And it's just like, oh God, it's such powerful knowledge, this stuff. But I always say I didn't have a roadmap of attachment when I was growing up to men at all. I have no secure roadmap of attachment to any man in my family, 100%. Now, in my 20s, I find this really interesting because I've been married to my husband for I don't know, for about a million years. So we met in our 20s and we went through quite a bit. But in my 20s as well, I had the good fortune to move in with a couple of friends, and my friends John and Kirsten, and I lived with them for 7 years. And they were married, and I know now I've described this. They modelled proper intimacy in their marriage, their relationship. It was like I was like the teenage in my 20s, and I watched them. I watched how they sorted things out, how they were chilled, how if they hadn't, there were boundaries, there were arguments, but reparation, like you said. So I love what you said about the fact that we can kind of learn this stuff, if it did go wrong at an earlier age, sort of, say in your teens or whatever, because shit happens. It's like I think what you're saying and what I've experienced is there is hope, and how we access that hope.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like, what a lovely story that you shared, by the way. Like, that's just so beautiful, that the universe gave you this gift of being able to see this other couple modeling secure, intimacy. And part of what we want to see with that is the reciprocity, right? The give and the take, the way they show up for each other, the balance, and the flow between two people, and what that can look like. So absolutely, that's one way that we can heal, is by, okay, look for secure relationships, right? And see what that looks like and model on that. If if that's not what was given to you. Another way to learn about how to have a secure relationship is to get into a relationship with a secure person. Right? Which is, it's a tough ask for some of us.
So do we just have to go and date someone we find really, really boring? We're like, that's the one. That is the one, right? You're going to teach me.
It's that, I mean, it's not gonna hurt if if you can attach to a secure person, you're going to become more secure.
Yeah.
And I feel like too, there just are a lot of opportunities when it comes to how do we heal this. There are lots of different ways to do it. There's not only one way to do it. I use the ideal parent figure protocol. Lots of people do reparenting in many different ways. And I think the somatic practices, and healing modalities are really important with this as well, because it's partly about healing the trauma, and that has to be done through the body, and through the breath, right? And so I think there are lots of different ways to come at that.
I love that sort of reparenting work. And you're making me think of the work as well of the self-compassion stuff from, say, Dr. Kristen Neff. And I know what was foundational for me in my sober journey, and I've told this story a few times, but my last day one, touch wood and everything, I'd done quite a bit of sober time back and forth, but I found Tara Brach's Reign of Self-Compassion. And I listened to it on that day where I was just broken, and it took me through a process of recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And the nurture piece I had never learned how to do. I could identify emotions. I could go, that's what it is. And then it was like, right, come on, crack on. I'd never just sat there and gone, I'm sorry it hurts, sweetheart, I'm here for you now. Like I'd never put that piece together. And it broke me open, and it was like, oh. And then someone said to me, that sounds like you're reparenting, and it felt like that. It's like, oh, I found little Kate. But I, that was, obviously we need to kind of often do a lot of that work with another professional, right? And you're trained in this, very well trained in this field. So what would you say to that? What can we do on our own, and what would we, go to a professional for, like yourself?
One of the best things to do on your own is any kind of meditation, because that will help you become a better self-regulator. And the more that we can emotionally self-regulate, the more that we can be present for our relationships, the more that we're available for intimacy and controlled vulnerability, right? And that we're able to share ourselves with another person if we can self-regulate. And for me, meditation has been huge, and there are lots of studies about that and the value of meditation. Not everyone can do meditation. So, I think there are other ways to
meditation, right? Like you could have a vinyasa flow, which is quite fast, could be a way of not quite so confronting as a sitting, breathing meditation.
Yeah, different things work for different people. I love the Osho dynamic meditation, which is also very cathartic. And this is one where you're doing some breathing and moving. Breath work in particular is also really great for that. So the more that we can just kind of have a foundation so that we can regulate ourselves, the more prepared we are to do the work, because I like to say I work from the outside in and the inside out. And the outside in is the part about the boundaries, right? Which are super important, about saying, okay, these are the things I will and won't do. And then it's also, when it comes to coaching, it's about goals and accountability and mentalizing, which is thinking about thinking, and collaboration. And that's one side of it. And then working from the inside out is where the ideal parent figure protocol comes in. And that's basically a guided meditation where I'm walking a person through the different stages of attachment and allowing them to experience that with imaginary parents so that they develop a new internal working model. So that's the way that I do it. But I believe that irregardless of who you work with, having someone to hold space for you while you do this is incredibly powerful. I do the ideal parent figure protocol myself. I receive that treatment still because it's so awesome and I love it. I have it at 1:00 today, and we always record the meditation so I can listen to it again later. But it's never as powerful as it is when there is another human being sitting with me.
I love that, I love that. And do you know what I love as well, Dufflyn, is that, we are two women in recovery. And I think there's a lot about the crossover as well with, with this addiction, with like sort of alcohol and with the love addiction, that somehow I will be fixed. Somehow, I'll do something and then I'll be fixed and then I'll be dead. And part of that narrative feeds into that. But you know what? I've got therapy after this. I'm going to EMDR and I'm doing internal family systems. You're having it. It's like, it's okay to say that part of our self-care, part of our recovery is that ongoing care of ourselves where we need that secure attachment with the professional space holders, but we're having that, receiving that ourselves. And I love that.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm one of those where I'm a lifetime learner and I believe in personal growth, and I'm not, I don't see myself as an expert. I see myself as another person on the path, and if I can walk beside you for a while, then both of our journeys will be enriched by that. I learn as much from my clients as they do from me. Right. It's just that I might be a step or two ahead of them. And that's it. But yeah, I think there's a lot of connection when it comes to, drugs or alcohol and this idea of like, someday I will be fixed. I mean, this is one of the core sort of fantasies of the woman who struggles to love and be loved, is like, someday somebody's going to come along and love me the way I always wanted to be loved. And the truth is that is unmet needs from childhood. And we can't put that on our partners because our partners are not ever going to be perfect. They're human. They're going to fail. There are going to be ruptures. Unfortunately, this is the messy intimacy, right? That we have to learn to tolerate by doing our meditation and our work. But we can have the experience of perfect care in our imagination with ideal parents. And this is why I love that specific modality, because I, as a coach, am going to fail my clients sooner or later. I will, because I'm human. I'm going to mess up, right? My therapist is going to mess up, right? My yoga teacher is going to mess up. They're human.
I love that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But imagination creates new possibilities. And within the imagination, we can have that perfect care that we always wanted. So if we give ourselves that, then we're not looking for it in everybody else.
Yeah. So just tell us, before we go, I'm aware of time, just tell us about what you've got coming up this weekend and then how it feeds into your program as well.
Yeah. So this weekend, October 8th, 9th, and then also again on the 19th, I'm doing a free talk, which is called Is It Love or Is It Addiction? Where I'm going to break down the 4 hallmarks to look for the mindset shift that every woman goes through when she's done with the BS. And the number one way to know, like just super simple, really easy, number one way to know if this is what you're struggling with. And so that'll be just a simple 1-hour talk. And then that leads into my 6-week group coaching program, which is called Heartbreak to Healed, which is where we go really in depth. And each woman has the opportunity. It's all, by the way, most of my work is women only, self-identified women only. So each woman has the opportunity to identify, as we said, where is she at on the spectrum between normal behavior and maladaptation. And I'm asking really, really specific questions. So we're not going to miss anything. So this is, an opportunity to create a real foundation for the kind of secure intimacy that we all want.
And we'll put that in the show notes. And I love the fact that it's so specific and you can tell, because it sounds, what we're talking about is a lot of this can be very confusing. It can feel confusing. It can feel, yeah. So the fact that you can break it down and there's real kind of tangible kind of points that you can pull out. And I also know, because I've done a workshop with Dufflyn around boundaries, and you do hold space so beautifully and capably for people. Like, I felt completely safe in your workshop, and it was super super useful and informative, and tangible tools. So I can 100% vouch for Dufflyn. So check her out. Go to the free talk. See if this chimes with you. See if this is something that you're working on as well. You might be listening out and thinking, yeah, alcohol, booze, this has been the issue, but maybe there's something chiming as well there that you're like, oh, okay, this is something else. This is part of it. So, she's awesome. Thank you for so much for coming on. So before we just wrap up, can you give us three top tips for kind of looking after yourself in relationships, just for anyone listening
in? Thank you so much, sweetheart, for your kind words. I really appreciate that. It touches my heart. So three top tips for relationships, basically.
Yeah, looking after yourself in a relationship.
Looking after yourself in a relationship. Okay, so number one top tip for looking after yourself in a relationship is maintaining your own self-care. It's the first thing to go, right? And I'm guilty of that as much as anybody. I'm only going to meditate once today because I need to go see my partner. Maintaining our own self-care in any relationship is primary, because you can't give what you don't have. You can't pour from an empty cup. So I'd say that's number one thing. Number two thing for looking after yourself in a relationship is have a voice. Speak your truth. If you can't speak your truth to this person, who can you speak your truth to? You gotta say this. Say the unsayable. Say it. Just say it. Be brave. And I think number three is something about, I think, and this is especially for women, giving yourself space, giving yourself time, not hurrying, and allowing yourself to relax a little. Because in that space, we can be much more in our flow, we can be more available, and we can feel the love that may very well be coming at us. Like, sometimes the love is there and we're just like deflecting it, right? So relax and take it easy, and don't deflect the love.
Don't deflect the love. I love that. That's a pop song. Don't deflect the love. That'd be not a codependent pop song. So just before you go, what's your reason to love sober today?
You're my reason to love sober today.
Do you know, whenever we chat, I think like we are, like I always say to Mans, like the mirror neurons and all the kind of like the happy hormones like really light up when I speak to you. So it's been an absolute joy. I feel the same, and such a joy to speak to you. Thank you for sharing your humor and your generosity with us today, and all your your information. So we'll put everything on the show notes, and yeah, check out Dufflyn. She's awesome. If you're struggling, just send up a flare, info@lovesober.com, or just find your fit, find a sober community that chimes with you. There's lots out there now, so know that you're not alone, and see you next week for more chat.